This is my knife drawer. I made a decision that knives on the counter, I love them because I like looking at them because I like my knives, takes up a lot of space. I went with an in-drawer rack because it actually holds everything that I need to have in my knife collection very well, keeps it out of sight, keeps it in good shape, that's the key to it. It's made out of wood, so I'm never going to damage the blade. So this is a drawer of all things sharp. First off, every time I grab a knife, I use a sharpener on the blade. I'll show you that technique in just a second. So I keep two of them just handy to have. They're titanium little blades. You can pop them off to clean them. I'm about due. Gotta have razor blades, cutting loaves of bread before they bake. You know, razor blades are a valuable part of any knife drawer, and they've got a little flechette thing that is a French tool that does it, but I can do it just as well with just a regular old blade, a skewer. You never know when you got to poke something. And then the knives themselves. So basically this front row is kind of by length, but certainly by style. This half is all slicing, this half is all cutting. There's one knife in here I don't use, and that is because my wife isn't a fan of my knives, so I got her one of her own. She's a little more diminutive than I am, but Mercer is one of the brands that I really like that I experienced a lot in the restaurant. So this is a 6-inch chef's blade that she uses when she needs to use a knife, as opposed to all my other blades are 8-inch chef's blades, and that measurement is from there to there. So, from right to left, things that I have in, well, let's start with the back row, which I really like having the back row. It's very handy. This is my hidden knife. Nobody gets to play with this one. This one is well over 30 years old, also still the sharpest knife in my drawer. This is a boning knife. You can get boning knives that have a curve to them. I work well with a straight one, fairly stiff. Some of them will have a lot of flex. I like a stiff boning knife. This one's a Forstner, which is a good old brand. This one's very old. It doesn't have a full tang, which is not great in the knife world. But like I said, it's already held up 30 years, so I'm not too actually more than 30 years. I'm not too worried. Then I've got a couple of spatulas. This is just a convenient place to store them so they don't get bent up or anything. Our fancy steak knives, the little Henkels that we use every so often. That's just a little set of 4 of them. Then we get to real knives, other than the boning knife. These are the paring knives. And I have 3 different styles of paring knives that I use. And a little bit later, we'll look at some of the differences that each of them can offer. Again, Mercer, I like that brand. This one is the most comfortable for my size of hand and for using a pinch grip in my mind. This is a little Wusthof, which is another brand that is very familiar. This one's got a very thin blade, so it's very flexible. Nice little point. You can do detail work with that quite well. And then this one's an old friend. I don't even know what the brand was. I've had it for so long. Another over 30-year-old knife. Holds its edge fairly well. I haven't brutalized it too bad keeping it sharp. And it's got a little heavier blade, and that's what I like about it. So like if you're doing garlic or something small and you want that strength of blade, that's what that gives you. So those are the paring knives, handwork. Then we get to the slicers. These are the big boys. You do a lot of meat, and you need to have this style of slicer with the indents, which help the meat fall off. It's called a granate, I believe is the pronunciation for it. This one's not an expensive one. This is, again, Mercer, a brand that I enjoy quite a bit, but it's a great length of slicing. Just so you know, to give you an idea of the difference, this is what most people would call a standard slicing knife. So you can see the difference. So that's the big meat slicer that just barely wants to fit in its little tray. We'll come back to this slicer. I've got my gnarly bread slicer and my mellower bread slicer. This one is part of the same set that boning knife came out of that I literally got over 30, 40 years ago. This one is a more recent one, and it's a very aggressive serration. You can see the difference on how deep those indents are. So this is for your crusty breads, and this one's also really good for example, when I want to spatchcock a turkey to cut through the rib cage of a large bird. This one became a surgical saw. So those are bread slicers. Now this knife actually goes with what used to be my carving set when I would do table-side carving. Remember, this drawer has all things pointy, so we have two choices of carving knives. But that's what this one originated for. But it's a Gerber, which is a great brand. I'm sorry, this one's a Wusthof, which is a brand you see represented in my drawer a couple places. And it's just a well-made, nice slicing knife. This one comes a little bit more out of the restaurant. This is the Gerber. This one's got a composite handle, so it's a little bit, it takes a little bit more abuse. But that's an 8-inch slicing knife. These hold great edges for cutting meats. One of the newer additions to my group of knives, and by newer for my standards, it's 5 or 6 years old. It's a Sentoku style blade, which again has the indents, which is great when you're slicing meats or cheeses or eggs. Falls right off. It's a decent heavyweight blade, a nice length on it, and it is. And I've just been real happy with this one. It's a pretty knife, good edge, lends itself well to a pinch grip, which is very important for somebody when you spend a lot of time holding knives in the kitchen. Then we get to the chef's knives. And these ones we'll bring out on the board and show you some differences in a little bit. Dahlstrom, this is their Gladiator series, nice heavy knife, slightly lighter weight knife. And again, these ones are technically all listed as an 8-inch chef's blade, but you can see manufacturers take a little bit of liberty with how they do that. But it really starts right about where the bolster, which is this portion of the knife, begins and runs down the spine of the knife. That's how the measurement is. So my Dahlstrom is my heaviest chef's blade. My old buddy, this is another Wusthof that's been in my drawer for well over 30 years, probably even over 40. And it is just a great utilitarian knife. This one's newish, only 10 years old. It's a Japanese style, so the grip style is different. You can see it has kind of what they call their D grip on it. So it handles a little bit differently, still lends itself well to a pinch grip. And it's a light, flexible, relative to chef's knives, more flexible blade that does a really good job. So, other than that, another really old school carving fork, still love it. And then I'm one of those people who I actually take my knives with me when I travel. Wouldn't want to be without them, so I've got a variety of sheaths and cases that also get to live in the sharp drawer. So there you go. That's a quick tour of the knife drawer. We'll pull a couple out and show you a couple of differences between some of the chef's knives and some of the paring knives and how to use them for a brief tutorial. So now we're going to play around with chef's blades. We're going to chop an onion and look at a variety of the techniques that go into producing consistent pieces of onion. The goal is use the geometry to figure out the best way to get the cut that you want. So with an onion, first thing we got to do is get the stuff on the outside off. You want to cut this end all the way off, okay? And then it's easiest at this point, unless you're doing some kind of ring, to cut it like that down the center and then peel each half of it and get the skin off of it to whatever threshold your personal level is to get it going. I like to use this moment to pull some of the hairs off the back so I don't have to deal with them over the course of the next steps of preparation. So we get that part going. Now for this I'm using my heaviest blade with the one I cut through and cut the tips off. We'll switch, we'll go back and forth. All these blades can do all the things that we're going to do with this onion today. Different blades yield different results. So for example, if I'm going to do a julienne straight down on top, I'm going to use this heavy blade. And I think that's what I'm going to show you first. Okay? So we keep that, in most cases we're going to keep that piece of the onion attached where the roots grow because it holds it all together. You'll see how that comes into play for our second step of cutting. The first step though, we're just going to do a julienne cut. So we want to take that off so we've got a decent, even, so everything's going to end up the same. And this is more of the restaurant style than the fancy French style, but this is great for making caramelized onions, French onion soup, all kinds of things. And you start at a slight angle, and again, we're using a pinch grip. I'm using the heaviest blade because it just eases right through it. I don't barely have to push to get the knife to go through. This knife, as I said, the pinch grip, this hand is here to guide. You can't see it very well from what I'm doing, but every time after I take a slice, my hand moves back just far enough that I'm ready for the next slice. And that's how you can keep your slices a fairly consistent thickness. So those fingers are your guide fingers. Now, when you get to this point of the onion being cut, this gets a little precarious. So, tip it over. Instead of keeping it up tall, tip it over, and then you can finish the side, and you've got a half an onion, well sliced into julienne slices, good for all kinds of things, ready to go. Okay, so let's move those down to this end of the board, and we'll bring out some other players and play with a couple of different ways of cutting. The Santoku knife has a nice heavy blade and is really made for this. It's got a little bit more of a curve along this edge of it, so you need to be aware of, you have to rock it just a little bit more. So the next step that we're going to do is to dice an onion. And the easy way to do this that you learn in the restaurant world is to make a cut. We're going to go for about a 1/4 inch dice. So you make a cut into the onion, okay, separating those two parts. You don't want to cut all the way through if you can avoid it. It happens, and you can deal with it. But we leave this on because it keeps it attached. We take that cut down to where you can see, okay, so I'm still leaving this attached. There's a reason for that. Now we cut about the same dimension. We're just going to do half of this because we're going to play with a different cut on the other half. So we'll set half of this aside. And then, now, you do the same thing. These fingers are the guide. Every cut is a 1/4 inch, and you end up with fairly symmetric pieces. None of them much bigger than the others. So, that's, a Santoku knife is especially good. You're going to edit that part out, right, Jacob? A Santoku knife lends itself particularly well to chopping vegetables, in addition to being a very versatile knife. And we can accomplish the same thing with this one, my most traditional, very heavy, not very heavy, medium weight chef's blade. Again, this one's a stalwart that I've had for decades. And you just, keep doing it. Then when you get to the end, you just take, and you've still got a couple of cuts in there. If you need to, make them deeper. And you'll end up with the rest of it. Okay? Other trick, pro tip here. Never drag your blade like that across the board. If you're going to push things around, flip the blade over. Use the back. It's got two sides. One of them's not sharp. The other one is. You work hard to keep the side that is sharp, sharp. So, you'll keep it sharper if you don't drag it back and forth across the board. So now, we're going to look at how to make a finer dice with the onion. So we've already got one cut in there that we did before. If you're going to do a fine dice, you would make another cut. A little harder since we've taken off the other half of the onion. And then one more. And then you cut through the other way. So now you've defined your cube shape. And then you take this knife and keep it closer to the edge. And so you end up with much smaller pieces. And this knife can do this. Any of these knives can do this. But this kind of slightly more delicate work is where the finer blade of a Japanese style blade, in this case it's also a Damascus steel, which is the term for when you see the striations in the steel as part of the foundry process for these blades, of how they fold the metals. So this one lends itself especially well to slightly more detailed cuts. But like I said, you can make all three of these cuts with any of these four knives. Then when you get toward the end, you put a couple more little slices. And then just finish it off. And there you go. Very efficient. How to use the different knives, what some of the differences are and how they perform, and how to take an onion down, 3 different sizes. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time working with paring knives. Do some detail work. We're going to play with some strawberries. We're going to look at the difference between the 3 that I personally have and use. What are the trade-offs? Frankly, any one of the 3 could do any of the stuff that we're going to do with these, but I have reasons why I like each one of them. This one is my favorite. It's got probably the largest grip, and with my size mitts, that helps me quite a bit. It also has a very nice fine point, so I can do detail work. And I kind of like the strength of the blade. It's a little more rigid than a lot of them. So, when you're going to take the tops off the strawberry, the easiest way I've found is keep your blade fairly still and move the strawberry. So you can just kind of hold your blade in one place and move the strawberry on it. Now, again, one of the other things is every time I use one of my blades, I touch it with a sharpener. So these ones have already had the drag sharpener brushed along them to be sure that they are in good shape. And this one's big enough, you can use a pinch grip for most of the stuff that you do. You don't have to. You can use it like that as a regular knife. I just had a habit will almost always go to a pinch grip or some modification thereof. So if you're making strawberries for a compo or whatever, you can just slice them up. In that respect, that's where the heavier blade for me is a little more effective, is when I want to do that kind of work after I cut the top off. I like having a little more weight to the blade, as opposed to this little guy is more delicate, and it's very sharp, holds a great edge. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the top off. And trust me, once you get used to that technique, that's the easiest way there is to core and get the top off of the strawberry. I didn't quite go steep enough if you want to get out that. Some people don't like that chewy white core. So this one, we're going to create a fan out of it, and that's why this blade is particularly nice, is you can get nice slices, and it's got a good point. You can do delicate work. And then you can just press that down, and you have a strawberry fan. Okay? Sprinkle a little sugar, a little sour cream, a little brown sugar. So it's a nice little display unit. And shows the effectiveness. Now, if you're just paring strawberries for, not that one, that one's not a good one. Paring strawberries for a dessert or whatever. Again, take the top off. These knives lend themselves well. You've got to be sure that you stop pressing about the time the blade gets to your finger. But for good old school paring, that's what that's called, P-A-R-I-N-G, that's what this knife does. So, next candidate. This one has a slightly stiffer blade, the stiffest of the 3. You can tell by how thick the spine is on the back. It's shaped a little bit more like a Santoku knife. That's purely coincidence. It wasn't, I mean, I've had this for longer than Santoku knives have been out in the marketplace, and it does effectively what everything else does. It's just a little bit heavier blade, and frankly, this is the one if I'm going to be cutting stuff where I might risk running into a bone or maybe even, you know, some kind of piece of metal or something. I don't really care as much with this one. I like it, but it's not my favorite, so it becomes a utility knife. The one I'm not afraid to put into situations where it might suffer a little bit. But it's a good workhorse. There's nothing wrong with the blade shape. Like I said, all 3 of these knives can do everything that I'm doing, each of them with adequate results easily. And there you go. There's the 2 repairing knives, different styles, a little bit about how to use them, and a little bit of basic knife work with regards to some of our favorite summertime dishes. A nice fresh strawberry.